Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Turner, and today we're going to be talking about developing a media kit for your business. I will be recording this, and I do take questions. If you have questions, I would ask them. You ask them in the question bar off to the right of your screen, and I will address them after we go over everything. So welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a good week so far. Now, one of the first questions I get from people is, why should a business develop a media kit? Because it's a lot of work to put one together. Well, there's a lot of reasons behind doing that. Number one is, and the most important thing about a media kit, is that if a journalist contacts you to do a story about your business, if you do not have a media kit, especially things like about the business together and high resolution photographs, you miss your window of opportunity very, very quickly. And I'll give you an example of this. I work with a lot of bed and breakfasts, and a couple of months ago, I got a phone call from a journalist from Florida that was doing an article about pet-friendly B&Bs in Florida, and she wanted to know if I had any suggestions for bed and breakfast to call. And I gave her about, I would say, more than 3 dozen B&Bs in the Florida area that I know for a fact are pet-friendly, that were of the type that she was looking for. She was looking for, higher-end B&Bs with high-end room rates, and she ended up using 3 B&Bs. And the reason she used the 3 B&Bs that she did were because they had their stuff together. Basically, they were ready for that phone call that said, we're doing a feature story about pet-friendly B&Bs at high-end B&Bs, and they had stuff to send her. When a journalist usually gets a story that they need to do, their timeline for when they need to get the information together and when they can wait for you to get together is few and far between, so to speak. They don't have a week for you to, call your photographer or track down where your high resolution photographs are, wait for you to type up a biography. They want all of the information together, and they want it now. One of the other reasons for actually putting a media kit together is if you do put it online, it's very good for search engine optimization. And also long term, hopefully most of you have, even if you're going to be in business for a while, you have a long-term exit strategy for your business. And when you go to sell your business, having that media kit information together in advance can be extremely helpful. So I'm going to start out with a couple of kind of basic things that you need to get together. And one of the first ones is having high resolution photos of your business. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that you can put a media kit out there for people. One of the easiest ways is to set up a free Dropbox account, and then you can have all of your media kit information together in it. So when a journalist calls you, then you can share the Dropbox link with them. I also have some free file sharing services that I use that you can use to send either zip files, which is kind of a folder with a bunch of files that have been condensed, or you can send them individually. So if anybody would like those links, please let me know, and I'd be happy to send them over. Now, high resolution photos, the more you have to share, the better, and in a variety of formats. And by what I say a variety of formats, I mean have them both verticals and horizontals, because if you have them all horizontals, for example, the space constraints for whatever that they're using for their article may not have a particular that particular space for horizontal. They might be looking for vertical photos, especially if you have, a horizontal photo of, the front of your building and a vertical, so that they have an option. So when you're taking photographs, it's a good idea, especially for your media kit, whether you have a photographer do them, or you have a friend, or you yourself happen to be a good photographer. Try to take things with your camera or even your smartphone, which now gives high resolution photos. Try to take them at different angles and in different formats so you have them all ready to go. The best types of photos, or the best format actually, is in JPEGs. The other one that journalists do prefer as well is something called PNG, but definitely JPEGs are the ones to have. And as I said, the more photos you have, the better. Now, the other thing that's important to have is logos. And have as many formats as you can available. JPEG, TIFF, there's one called translucent GIF, the one on the top and the one on the right here are translucent GIFs because you don't know what the format's going to be used for. Black and white is also good because, again, you don't know whether the article, whether it's online or offline in print, is going to be in color or in black and white. If you provide something in color and it's for a print format for a newspaper, for example, certainly when newspaper articles transfer a color logo into black and white, it might not have the contrast that you want. So it's important to actually, if you have a color logo, especially transfer that logo yourself or have a graphic designer transfer that into black and white and make sure the contrast actually looks good because you don't want to depend on whoever is ending up with it to give you the final result that you want. Okay, we had a couple of people late to join us, so I'll just go over really quickly. If you have questions about what I'm going over, there should be a question box to the right of your screen. Please ask questions as you have them, and I will address them when I'm gone through the rest of this. The other thing that should be in your media kit is if you have print literature, make sure that you have digital copies of those and make sure those are included in your media kit literature. You're probably not going to have a journalist have a call for the print literature, but it's a good idea for them to get a general look of what your branding looks like, because a lot of times when they're building the article and when they're sending information to who's ever designing something, especially if you end up in a magazine for whatever reason, they actually want to try to brand as much within your branding as possible. So the more information that you give them, the better. You know, you should also have copies of any of your print literature in digital format anyway, just so you have that in your files. Now I'm actually going to go back a page and talk about the photos, for example. If you do have photos that you're going to put in your media kit, the one thing that I would make very, very sure of is that you have copyright permission to use them. So if you had someone come and take photos for you for an article, for example, you need to ask permission and get it in writing for them to have them available for reuse. You know, the same goes for, you know, you found a great photo of your building, for example, that someone else took online. You need to make sure you have written permission for use because you can run into copyright issues with that, unfortunately. Let's see. Biographical profile is very important to have in advance. Whether it's, you know, a whole biography of, you know, you and your staff, you know, you and a partner, you and your husband, wife, you know, whoever you're in business with, the more information that you can give them, honestly, the better. You don't want to make it too personal because that information, especially if you're actually putting that out there publicly, can be used for nefarious means. But the kind of information about where you went to school without specific dates is very, very helpful. But make it interesting. If you've ever done anything in your background or your life that's been important, make sure that goes into the biographical profile. And then also make sure that you add in, you know, how did you end up in the business that you were in? You know, what made you want to become a graphic designer or an architect, for example? Or how did you end up, you know, being a doctor instead of being a pastry chef, which is what you wanted to be when you were a kid? And part of the reason to have this biographical profile is because when a journalist calls you last minute, they might have a very, very short amount of time to actually do an interview with you, but they might need more information for what's called filler for them. So if you're giving them factual things that they can draw from to fill into the article to make it more interesting, and also to give the readers more information about, you know, who you are, you know, your background, the better off it is. I mean, basically, a media kit for your business is basically like a brain dump of everything that you know about your business, all the information that you have about your business, so you can just hand that off to somebody. And then, of course, make sure that you have pictures of, yourself, your staff, anybody that you're talking about in the biographical profile, and make sure those images are high resolution as well. The one thing that I would caution is if you do have photos that you use, make sure that they're updated and replaced every couple of years. And this is important from a branding perspective, because if you have a photo in there, for example, that's 5 years old, you want to make sure that if you run into someone at a local Chamber of Commerce meeting and they've seen an article, they may not realize that that photo of you is actually you. They might look at you and go, gee, you look familiar. I think I saw you someplace before. But if you have a more recent photo of yourself in there, then it becomes more instantly recognizable, so that in-person branding is there. And also, if you've been in the news before, make sure you have copies of that information and, who it was, when it was. Even if you don't have the actual stories itself, give them a list of, I was in, Arts and Antiques in the fall July issue in this article, and here's some information about it, and here was the author about it. If you have the actual articles themselves that you can scan in, it's good, again, reference material, just like having biographical information together about you, because a journalist might say, well, so-and-so was also written up, and then they'll refer back to that other article again. Business description, very, very important. And there's two technically parts of the business description. There's one general part of the business description that's going to be who, what, where, why about the business. So your company sells widgets. They sell, widgets made of steel, widgets made of brass, widgets made of wood. And this is where they source the wood, for example, just as a little bit of a teaser. And then you'll also get into specifics about, okay, the wood that we use in these particular widgets is sourced from Brazil and harvested by, cute little 15-year-olds that get paid $50 an hour for it. So you want the specifics and the general information about that. Journalists are interesting, especially if they're writing feature stories, because they'll actually go into the specifics for business descriptions and they'll pull little interest parts out of those, like, oh, the 15-year-olds that get paid, $50 an hour to harvest this wood, for example, would be something that they would find interesting from that. So the more information that you can give them about it, the better. So if you're a spa, for example, the general spa information would be, just as an example, we've got 4 massage rooms, we've got 2 rooms for people that can have the things that you put your fingers in and your toes in, and I'm sorry, I forget the name of it. And then you also have, wellness rooms, you've got a spa, and then your business specifics description would give a list of your packages and services. And in a particular case of a spa, for example, you'd want to include pricing with that as well. It really depends on whether you have a product or service, and the pricing is something that you advertise publicly or not. But if you advertise pricing publicly, make sure that you put that specific pricing in the individual business descriptions, and also make sure that that's the one thing you need to eyeball before you send that information out to people, is make sure that information is correct and up to date. So if you add specific things or you delete them, for example, out of all of the things in your media kit, make sure that's up to date before you send it out. Because the last thing you want someone to do is write an article about your business and talk about, in a spa case, that you do hot stone massage and you don't offer it anymore, for example. Now, history of the business is important if you have one. You may not have one, you might be brand new. And if you're a brand new business, for example, and I'll say brand new business under a couple of years old, you may want to incorporate a history of the building you're in, for example, or a history of the town you're in, or a history of the particular type of business concept that you started. So it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically about the business, But if you've had a business that has been in business for a long time, or and I'll use in it as example, the photo from the top right is a bed and breakfast up in New Hampshire, and it formerly actually used to be a birthing center. So on her website, for example, she actually has not so much a history of her business because she's only been in business as a B&B for a few years, but back in the 1800s, she's got a whole history of her historic building used to be a birthing center. And it's really interesting, and people that come and stay there are attracted to that and focused on that, for example. So if you have anything historical wise, again, whether it's specifically about the business or about the building or the area, make sure that you include it in that media kit information. Do I have any questions so far? Oh, yes. If you have historical documents or historical photos, absolutely include them in the media kit. Most historical photos have passed copyright, but it is a good idea to check about that. Now, another thing to include in your media kit is if you've ever been awarded anything, received a commendation for anything, make sure that the award or commendation is listed. And if you have photos, again, make sure they're high resolution, if possible, are included with those. And make sure those names on the photographs have specifics. So this photograph, for example, instead of just adding it as image number 26, you want to make sure that it's labeled Excellence in Business Award, King Chamber of Commerce, for example. And the same goes for any other high resolution photos that you have in your media kit. Don't have them have generic file names. Make sure that they have specific names that correspond with what the actual photo is. This is the front of XYZ business. This is a photo of the co-owner, John Doe, for example, so that they know, because it makes less work and there's less likelihood of something being confused with something that it's not when the journalist sends things off to go to print or to proof or to be put online. Now, memberships are important as well. Make sure you list those and make sure you keep them up to date. It is okay if you're no longer a no longer a member of an association to list that, but make sure that you put an end date in there as well, especially if it's something significant. You were an ambassador at a chamber of commerce, for example, for 5 years in another state. That's good historical, and that kind of goes into the biographical information that a journalist can look into, because that's kind of information, especially like Chamber of Commerce things, that's a good attractor for other business. Oh, they've been very involved in a business chamber or business association. So it's good documentation to have in there. But again, make sure that's up to date. Volunteering, very, very important to put that information in there. If you do, or if you're trying to attract the millennial generation, and millennials or anyone under the age of 35, this is extremely important, and hopefully the journalist will actually include some of that information in there. Millennials are very big on using businesses that are into volunteering and into causes. So if you do volunteer or you're into cause, you donate to a lot of things, for example, make sure that information is in there, because that's going to be super important for that. That kind of information should be available publicly as well. So if you have a business website that they're using, realistically, you should try to find a way to work that in there. Again, especially trying to appeal to the younger generation, because that's a big draw for them. And supporting organizations as well. If your business donates, for example, or they participate in things, they support Relay for Life, for example. And again, if you have photos, and this goes with the volunteering too, if you have photos of organizations you support, with you participating in Relay for Life, for example, or your team, your business team, participating in Relay for Life, make sure all of those information on all of those documents and those photographs go into your media kit. And again, make sure that they're labeled. So volunteering, and then quotes or testimonials. This is really important as well, and this kind of goes into the filler category because they will do that, especially online. A lot of the online articles nowadays will actually take short quotes. These are a little bit too long for online use, so it's a good idea to provide some shorter ones which kind of range into the 2-sentence category and some longer ones, because what they'll do now is if you read a lot of the articles, especially ones written for the online media journals, is what they'll do is they'll actually use those as kind of line breaks. So about, a page and a half down, if you're scrolling down the page, there's going to be a small block of text with a quote or testimonial about the business that they're talking with. If you can provide that kind of information from them, journalists love that because then there's less digging that they have to do. Now, contact information, very, very most important thing to have in there. Make sure it's correct. Make sure it's spelled correctly. Address, website, social media, all of that's very, very important to have. And don't just say, find us on Facebook. Give them the specific URL for Facebook, for example. If you're on Twitter, give them the specific URL for Twitter, twitter.com/XYZ widget company. The more details that you can give people, the better. So I guess some of the other things to do, like I said, the more information that you can get together for a media kit, the better. Because you never know when you're going to get approached by someone, and you really, again, you need to have that together last minute. There's some places that you can go actually to kind of source out journalists. One is called Harrow, it's Help a Reporter, and the other one is called, laughingly enough, Muck Rack. And if you're looking to get into the news, these are good places to go to, source potential journalists to get into the news. You never know who you run into them online too. You might run into them at chamber after hours or just walking down the street at the airport, so to speak. So does anybody have any questions? Okay. So in terms of the business description, one of the things to concentrate on is, what type of business are you? If you want to differentiate itself and again, make life easier for the journalist who, and in some cases, may not even have time to interview you, what makes your business different from all of the other types of businesses out there? Is it a niche business? Is it, the first business of its kind? Is it there a long history of it? Has it been in the family for a long time? What differentiates your business, for example, from all of the other ones like that? Oh, okay. The question I had was, yes, local business awards are definitely good to put on there. The online business awards, if you've ever gotten one of those, though, thank you for that question. That's a good point. There's some online business, I guess you might call them scams. They're not really scams, but they're not real awards. So you might get an email or a letter from some company out in the Midwest that says, you've been awarded best in show for best business for this particular area for your local hair salon. And it's not a real business award. They're basically trying to get you to sign in online and buy a plaque from them. And that's not something that you actually want to put in your media kit, because the journalists actually know which are the real awards and not the real awards. So you kind of want to make sure that these are correct awards that you're getting, especially the local ones. Okay, and then the next question is, we have a Facebook page, but we haven't updated it in a long time. Should we put the link? That I would say definitely no. If you have social media links, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. If you have social media and you're not using them, don't advertise them. Definitely don't put them in your media kit, because you don't want people actually going there if you haven't updated it since last year, because they might put that information into the article. Okay, does anybody have any more questions? Okay, well, I guess this was a short and sweet one. If anyone has any questions, Lenny does have my email address, and we did tape a copy of this, so if you would like to review it, please let Lenny know, because I will be emailing him a link to this. So thank you so much for attending, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you so much.